Hi, everyone. It's 6:05, and I'll call to order. We have a quorum, the November meeting of the Weston Board of Education. We start, as always, with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome our newest board member, Chad Hepner. Everyone, Chad is he's an entrepreneur and a former speechwriter and brings a lot of experience to the district. He also has young children in the school district here, and he's eager and excited to get involved, and we really look forward to all of his great contributions to the Board of Education. So thank you, Chad, and welcome.
My pleasure, thank you.
Great. All right, the first item on the agenda is the election of board officers.
So at this time, sorry, have to get used to this. So at this time, I would ask members of the Board of Education for a nomination for board chairperson.
First, I just wanted to say that I've really enjoyed working on the board, including most recently as the interim chair, and I'm grateful for all the support I've received. I've also been flattered by inquiries from both parties as to my potential willingness to consider serving as the chair going forward. But for me, the reality as being a working mom with 2 kids in the district, I just don't have the time necessary to dedicate to this really important role. But fortunately, we have in Steve Ezzies a highly accomplished professional with a breadth of experience both in the private sector and in town governance, and critically in finance. So most importantly, Steve also has a desire to make a big impact on education. And for these reasons, I nominate Steve Ezzies for chair of the Board of Education.
Do I have a second? Now, shall we vote? Can you
Yes.
call the roll, please, Ms. Sakata?
David Felton? Yes. Sharon Ferraro? Yes. Peter Gordon?
Yes.
Chad Hepner?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll use it wisely. Then I will make a couple comments after we nominate and elect the vice chairperson and the secretary, because I'm very appreciative of the opportunity that this board has given me. Will someone nominate, one of the members of the board nominate a member of the board for the position of vice chairman of the board? I'd like to do that, and I'd like to nominate Melissa Walker. Do I have a second?
I second.
Jody, can we have a roll call, please? Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. And the third position is secretary of the board. May I have a nomination for the secretary of the Board of Education?
I nominate that the board move to make Bernadette Kingsley the Secretary of the Board of Education.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Jody, can you? Aye.
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 Congratulations, Bernadette. Before we get into the balance of the meeting, and we have a very full agenda, I'd just like to make a few comments. I'd like to thank everyone on the board for how welcoming they've been, how constructive they've been, how educational they've been to make my transition from the Board of Finance to the Board of Education. In particular, I'd really like to thank Melissa and Lisa, who've given their time and their knowledge and listened to some of my less than educated questions on how the Board of Education operates, because it operates differently than the Board of Finance in terms of how we operate in a committee fashion and how the committees actually do the day-to-day work of the board and bring their recommendations to the full board where those are required. It's very different than the experience I've had on the Board of Finance. And lastly, I'd like to thank Tony Pesco, who is not here. Tony, I've gotten to know over the years, having served on the Board of Finance, and his support and his guidance as we went through any number of issues on finance, on buildings, on any number of educational issues has been really great. And I spoke to Tony any number of times when I was considering volunteering to move from the Board of Finance to the Board of Education, and I want to thank Tony. For those of you who don't know me, I've lived in Weston for over 15 years. I moved from Westport. I served on the Board of Finance in Westport for a decade. I was the chairman for the last 8. I've been on the Board of Finance until recently here. I think I was starting my 11th year, 8 of which was as chairman. If you serve on the Board of Finance, regardless of what locale you live in, you're intimately involved in budgets, town budgets, and most importantly, education budgets. And if you're doing your job properly, unless you spend a lot of time understanding the components of an education budget, they're just a number on a page. And so here, I've made it a point to spend time with the superintendent, with the head of finance, to understand how budgets are put together, what the components are. So when those recommendations were made to the Board of Finance, they weren't just a number. There was substance behind them. My interest in moving from the Board of Finance to the Board of Education, interestingly, has a bit of deja vu in it. I served on Westport's Board of Finance when Westport was going through a school deconstruction, which I'll explain in a second, and then a construction period. The deconstruction is something that may be too strong a term, but there was a period of time when we actually closed a school in Westport, Greens Farms Elementary School. And we leased Greens Farms Elementary, or Westport leased Greens Farm Elementary to the arts community. And they were there for a period of time when we recognized that we needed that facility back, and that we had misunderstood where the number of students in town were going to be. And we had to buy that facility back from the arts community. It cost us over $600,000, plus we had to rehabilitate it. So closing a school is not something that's done lightly. And certainly, we're not going to make that decision here lightly. My first position here in Weston when I moved, I was a member of the building committee. I was a member of the building committee towards the tag end of finishing the WISP project. So I saw that for the last year or so. So it was rather instructive. Later in the meeting, we're going to be talking about the formation of an educational optimization committee. So that's the next step in the planning on how the Weston educational facilities will look like over the next 20, 25 years. We've had the Facilities Optimization Committee complete their work. They evaluated the physical plant. For that, I'd like to thank Rick Bertese and Gail Weinstein, who led that effort. And now the Education Optimization Committee is going to spend time determining what's going to go on inside of those buildings. Once we make a recommendation, and that's a term I'm going to use frequently, a recommendation, not a determination, because ultimately it'll be the townspeople that will decide how the school configuration is going to look like. So the Board of Education will have a recommendation, not only in the physical plant, but what goes on internally. They will make, there will be any number of very transparent hearings. Lisa will go through what that committee is going to look like over time, but there'll be representation not only across the Board of Education, but the town as well. The Board of Education will work in conjunction with the Board of Selectmen, with the Board of Finance, who actually are doing some of their own work right now and trying to determine what the best balance sheet will look like for this town going forward. So that's going on concurrently with what we're going to be doing. We'll be working with the Building Committee. We luckily have Richard Wolf on our Facilities Committee. Richard has more history in Weston than I think all of us in this room combined, so it's going to be very instructive to have Richard. And in terms of our coming up with a recommendation, I think people should put in the back of their minds that the recommendation at the earliest will come in the latter part of this coming year. So thank you again. Certainly my contact information and everyone's contact information is on the board's website, and I hope to hear from anyone that has questions or comments. Item number 4 on the agenda is an approval of the minutes. Are there any changes that any of the members would like to make? Can I have a recommendation to approve the minutes from our October 17th, 2022 meeting?
Yes, I move that the Weston Board of Education approve the October 17th, 2022 Board of Education meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Jody, do you want to call the board? Aye.
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 Thank you. Minutes are approved. Item number 5 is Student Board of Education representative comments.
Hi. Last time we saw you, we were just kicking off our homecoming week, which was very successful. We had our Powerpuff game on Friday, which the seniors unfortunately lost, and then a very successful homecoming football game on Friday, where we had a very good turnout, and we ended up winning by a lot. Recently, we've been really focused on community service at the high school, I feel like. Within student government, we're working with a few different organizations like Al's Angels and Open Doors Shelter, and then the other clubs in the school like Gender Equality Club and Fighting Childhood Hunger have been running a lot of supply drives for the community.
And then as our fall sports season comes to a conclusion, we have a few sports that are still playing. We have boys soccer's semifinal tomorrow at Pomperog, state semifinal at 7:30. And then I think there are 2 girls swimmers, swim and dive. I don't know which one they do, but they're qualified for the state opens. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like our football team's going to make playoffs this season, so that looks like it's going to be it for the fall sports season. And then, I don't know if Emma mentioned this, but as winter sports begin to start, we're planning our own pep rally to just to kick off the season properly. And that's about it.
Great. Are there any questions from any members of the board? I just want to say Melissa and I attended a really interesting conversation on Saturday at Staples High School on sustainability. And there were representatives from, I'm moving geographically, Greenwich, Stamford, Fairfield, Easton, and Ridgefield, and Westport. And I think we'd like to come back to you and talk to you about what we heard and what we think some opportunities are, because it's very clear that we as a district may be further ahead than some of our local school districts. And it's a really interesting opportunity, not only for doing the right thing from a green point of view, but as we learned, if you collect enough bottles, you can actually make a lot of money at it. And so it's going to be an interesting opportunity. Thank you. Item number 6 is public comment.
Yeah, typically, sorry, Mr. Haythorne, student representatives are welcome to stay or leave at your discretion. Thanks.
Sure. Greg Haythorne and Jennifer Haythorne, 6 Winthrop Hill. Before reading some prepared comments, I'm going to thank the newly unanimously elected Board of Ed Chair for transparently exposing his lack of objectivity with those misleading statements which reveal his predisposed agenda for his shift to this board. Westport's tax base and zoning have no relationship to the way we fund and operate the schools in this town. And what he didn't tell you about the closure for years of Green's Farms, by only representing that it cost a whopping $600,000 to buy back later, is that Westport saved tens of millions of dollars by not operating that school in the interim. So we're off to the start we might have expected with our new BOE chair. And we regret that this board failed to protect our community and our students with his unanimous election. 25 years ago, 8 years before the opening of WIS, in September of 1998, total district K through 12 enrollment was 2,140 students. Pre-K education would not be introduced for several more years. WPS operated 3 school buildings and enrollment was growing 7 to 8% per year. In parallel, district expenditures were growing 6% annually, as might be expected. Fast forward to 2022, and K-12 enrollment is today equal to September 1998, 2,150 students. But much has changed, and sadly not for the better, for WPS students since the construction and opening of WIS as an independent 4th school building in 2005. Total WPS staff is today about 100 more full-time equivalents, or plus 40% for the exact same number of students. The total budget has swollen from $23 million then to almost $60 million today, an increase of over 150%, growing exponentially more than the rate of U.S. inflation during that period, and while enrollment declined in aggregate over 15% back to the 1998 baseline. The district is employing dozens of off-book educators for the purpose of emergency academic intervention. In other words, growth in total expenditures is even higher, factoring all off-book COVID emergency spending. Baseline K-12 enrollment this school year collapsed over another 6 students, the greatest single-year enrollment loss since WIS opened. Despite the much-hyped increase in Weston home sales, WPS enrollment decline is accelerating, not reversing, as parents and taxpayers were repeatedly and inaccurately assured by BOE and TOE leadership. On a square footage basis, rather than almost 100% facility utilization as in 1998, today the 4-building WPS campus is less than 60% utilized. Classrooms are empty, disused, and at last check housing municipal record storage as well as a senior center. The WPS administrator to student ratios are highest in the state among all independent PK through 12 districts and spiraling upward as the rate of enrollment decline accelerates. And in the end, enrollment declines 2 to 3% while spending continues to grow over 4% annually this past decade. Obviously, this math is neither educationally nor fiscally sustainable. Accelerating student enrollment decline and increasing spending is a recipe for municipal and academic disaster. Now that the BOE has ratified a new 3-year staff employment agreement with the largest compound compensation increase in modern Weston history, Without operating reform and facility rationalization, spending is poised to explode upwards 6, 7, 8% annually, and that's if Weston taxpayers and parents are lucky. All while the district is already tens of millions behind in deferred maintenance and curriculum and technology investment, despite being the top spending district in the state. So as parents and taxpayers, we ask the following existential question of the Board of Education. What is the point of your existence? Clearly, the central office is capable of increasing annual spending at rates exponentially higher than declining enrollment all by themselves. They can ratify their own union agreements unchanged and unnegotiated without your perfunctory vote. And they can drag their heels on public record production and transparent academic outcome presentation without the assistance of this BOE. So again, we ask, what value does Weston's BOE aspire to add to the education of our children? And in the process, to Weston's quality of life? Because this board and the two prior are not only failing to add value, by virtue of your denial, you are aiding and abetting the decline and unsustainability of our district. This question is not rhetorical. Since public comment is not interactive, we'll answer for you. Without further delay, in the 2 months prior to the official start of the FY24 budget process, finally complete and publish a valid multi-year budget projection. Sure. Thank you, Jody. Here you go.
Josh and Emma, you're leaving me?
Thank you, guys. Right there with black.
Okay. Jennifer Haythorne, Winthrop Hill. Why? Because had Weston PS been properly managed and overseen by an objective Board of Education, holding spending growth to even 2 times average annual inflation rates, the annual Weston PS budget would be $15 million less than it is today. Published comparative Weston PS academic outcomes and college admissions results relative to neighboring districts. Hire an independent auditor to objectively assess Weston PS curriculum, technology, and disaggregated student academic performance. Direct the central office to present you with 3 or more budget proposals for FY24. The first, a flat 0% budget. The next, a typical status quo budget, which slowly cuts services and raises independent professional based on 3-school operation. Ask your interim and pending chairs to give up their leadership posts and step down from the board entirely to make way for new, objective leadership unconstrained by the baggage of your ongoing neglect and failures. This time last year, this same board disbelievingly challenged not 1, but 2 identical independent FY23 enrollment projections for a minus 40 student enrollment decline. To quote BOE member Sharon Ferraro, quote, "Yeah, well, I hear you, but I guess I'm just going to wait and see," unquote. Well, now you see that enrollment decline is not less but 55% greater than both projections. The K-8 enrollment projection rate of inaccuracy is 800%. Other than triple Weston taxes by spending 10% more annually against declining academic outcomes, what are you going to do actually defend the academic prospects of every Weston public school student? Because the only other thing Weston PS has in common today with 1998 other than enrollment total is that this BOE is still relying on chronically inflated enrollment projections to indefensibly compel Weston voter support for avoidable overspending. If this BOE is permitted to, quote, stay the course, unquote, for another budget cycle while enrollment continues collapsing, you will have penned the epitaph for our community's proud educational legacy. Weston PS mediocrity and underachievement will be an inevitability. The more you spend, the less Weston PS achieves educationally. Superintendent Barbario and her cabinet will have no possible chance for success. It is time for urgent change and operating reform. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Good evening. My name is Michelle Ligori, 250 Georgetown Road. I'm here tonight to get the commitment from the board to do two things. Number one, to remediate the mold contamination in Hurlbut so that our children are no longer exposed to this potentially dangerous inhaling. And number two, reimburse me for the medical bills that I incurred due to the exposure to the mold. To comply with the public hearing rule, I'm limiting my comments, but urge you to read the details I sent you by email, which I request be incorporated into the record. The issue is mold contamination. 457 days ago, mold testing was performed at Hurlbut, which confirmed findings with a bare minimum of 2 areas that were swabbed. No thorough testing was performed. The fact is, they did find mold. And it was not accurately represented in August 2021 nor in August 2022, which did not meet clean building criteria or degree of severity. No action had been taken of preventative measures after their discovery in August 2021. No implementation of air filtration, no HVAC and duct repairs were performed, even with knowledge from hygienics and aerolabs. No action had been taken regarding mold removal and remediation. No action to determine if students and staff's excess absenteeism was documented during this time regarding those who exhibited upper respiratory infections, bronchial and asthmatic allergies, which may correlate to these findings. According to the CDC, there are no EPA acceptable mold levels. Any amount of mold is dangerous to have inside of a building. Mold continues to grow when the source is not identified, removed, or remediated. If molds are found in a building, they should be removed. Mold causes health issues. It is not necessary to determine what type of mold is growing in the school buildings as much as the importance of immediate attention to remediation. Schools have a moral and legal obligation to maintain a safe and healthy commercial building at all times with routine maintenance, or can be found liable that the mold contamination environment could have reasonably been prevented, either because officials had reason to believe it would take place with knowledge of moisture, ignored disrepairs and deterioration, or if their response to preventative protocols weren't sufficiently implemented. A school that creates or ignores hazardous conditions out of sheer ignorance or negligence, or poorly maintains their buildings, can and should be held at fault for any personal injury and medical bills for actively contributing to harm. In closing, I ask you to expeditiously reimburse me for my medical bills and prioritize mold remediation as to protect our most vulnerable population. Herein is mold report number 1 and mold report number 2. You all should have copies of it. If not, I'm happy to give you copies. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there comments from anyone else? Move on to item number 7, new business. Lisa, will you talk about this?
Yes, thank you, Steve. The consent agenda, we have several items on the consent agenda that I'd like to review briefly, and I want to thank Director of Human Resources, Ms. Cavanaugh, for her work in this area. We have 2 new hires for the Weston Public Schools. Jennifer Herford is joining us as a para-educator at Weston Middle School. Jen joined us the last week of October. This is actually a replacement for Kate Michelli. who was a paraeducator, and I'll jump down to her transfers. Kate has been a paraeducator first at the intermediate school, right, Patty, and then at the middle school. And she expressed interest in the administrative assistant position for school counseling at the high school. You may recall that at the very beginning of the year, that assistant, Maxine Pierre, resigned to go back to school. So simply put, Kate Michelli will be our new school counseling administrative assistant, and Jennifer Herford Worthfield is going to take Kate's place at the middle school as a paraeducator. We also have Craig Lambert joining our middle school team as a teacher, as a replacement for Allison Kovac, who resigned. And if you look under the resignations, not to jump around, Allison Kovac resigned for personal reasons, teacher at the middle school. And we also have Carolyn Massa, who resigned. She was our physical therapist, or PT at WIS, to pursue another opportunity. Retirements, Sandy Baccaro, who has been a paraeducator for 11 years in the district, primarily at Hurlbut, also a mom. Shout out to her two Weston grads. She's retiring after 11 years, and we certainly wish her well. She will be retiring right after Thanksgiving. And that's the consent agenda.
I move that the Weston Board of Education accept the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
Jody? Aye.
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 Thank you. The agenda is accepted by the board. Tina? No, not Tina.
Tracy.
Oh, Tracy. I'm looking at Tina and saying Tracy. Tracy, could you give us an update on PPS and SPED?
Yes. I have a brief update for tonight. I just wanted to share an update on hiring to start. As you know, there are a few openings in PPS special education right now. It is absolutely a priority to be filling those positions. Please know that anytime we get an application, I am personally reviewing applications for each one of our open positions. In many cases, we're completing screenings, either virtual or over the phone, to try to determine if those candidates are a good fit for our district and can help us to move forward. So I'm hoping to have updates on those soon, and of course, that process is ongoing. I also wanted to share an update about our Professional Development Day, which occurred on Election Day. One of our district goals within PPS Special Education this year is a district-wide update of the counseling curriculum, which I've spoken about. That is an enormous undertaking. We are reviewing and revising all of the experiences for students preschool through grade 12 through our developmental guidance curriculum. And actually, coincidentally, Meredith is here tonight. Meredith facilitated that session on Tuesday. It was incredibly productive. I think we made more progress than any of us could have hoped or imagined. I'm excited about that work this year. And now, because we've done some district level work, we'll be able to focus at the building levels moving forward, which is also a bit easier from a scheduling standpoint as well. And then my last update is, the board has been hearing about parent meetings this year. Our next parent meeting is actually tomorrow night here in the Weston Middle School Library. We begin at 4:30. Our focus for tomorrow is CT SEDS, which is our new IEP system, and helping parents get acclimated to that program and how to access documents for their children. We will also be talking about the updated and revised dyslexia guidelines that came out in Connecticut in July. That will be the second half of the meeting. The presentation will be recorded if families are unable to attend and posted on the district website, just like the September meeting. So we're hoping to see families there.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
Yeah, what were some of the highlights from the counseling review?
Yeah, so it's been several years since the last round of updates, and so we started our work, or that day, really just looking over the information that we have had in place for the last several years. We have a number of new staff members. K-12, there are new standards in Connecticut. We were aligning that work, new compared to the work that had been done previously, just to be clear. So we looked at what work we have that aligns with those standards, and actually every building dug into the new standards and mapped out what are the current lessons that we're teaching in alignment with those standards, and also, especially at the elementary level, what are some ideas that we have about lessons for moving forward. I spent a lot of time with the two elementary groups, and there's an emphasis, even at that level, on college and career readiness, obviously, very much more broadly than we look at it at the middle school and high school. And so we were just talking about how can we more successfully integrate that kind of planning and thinking for students at a younger age, and develop a scope and sequence that not only makes sense within a building, but makes sense on a district-wide continuum. So it was nice to have everybody together. We were in person. Just felt good.
Any other questions? Great, let's move.
One thing, did you speak about the upcoming parent meeting?
I did.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Tomorrow night.
I missed it. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the class of 2022 statistical report. Megan, is that you? Oh, it's we, okay.
It's like musical chairs. Good evening, everyone.
Thanks.
I have to ditto Tracy's response about being in person. This is my first in-person Board of Education meeting, so I am very excited to see everyone out in front of their computers instead of behind them. This evening, I'm joined by Principal Ward and Meredith Starzyk, our Director of School Counseling. We are here tonight to present the Class of 2022 Statistical Report for Weston High School. Do you all have a copy of the report in front of you? Great. So
There's a few extra copies back there if anyone in the public wants it.
So the purpose of this report, as I understand, and Lisa, you can obviously chime in as well as you see fit, is to provide an overview of some statistics and on the standardized testing trends for the class of 2022. And we do provide this report on a yearly basis based on the following class. We also will provide analysis of the college admission process and those that were accepted last year. And the data that we pull from this report does come from our Naviance platform, as well as some data that the College Board presents out to the public. And the program helps us also compare students' academic credentials against those of former students in examining notification to parents specific to college acceptance. From what I understand, last year's report looked a little different. We did have a pause or an interruption to state testing, as many of you are aware, from COVID, and we are now back in a format that looks very similar to the pre-COVID data analysis. So moving on to, so I will begin the report, and then I will transition some of the additional pages to Megan to review, as well as Meredith. Okay? So we're on page 3 of the report. Everyone's there? Okay, so at the beginning portion of the report, just to kind of give some background around SAT and PSAT and some of the other acronyms that are in the report. As a reminder, PSAT stands for Preliminary Scholastic Aptitude Test. This PSAT is administered in students' 10th and 11th grade in October. The SAT, which is the Scholastic Aptitude Test, is administered to all 11th graders, which is mandated by the state of Connecticut during the spring of their 11th grade year, although students can take the assessment more than once. And the ACT is the American College Testing Exam, which provides a overview of college readiness assessment for the students, and AP stands for Advanced Placement, which is an assessment that's administered at the end of an advanced placement course in May. So we begin some of the review and the trend data for the SAT based on the school snapshot. As you may recall, we added this, we wanted to add this to the report because there is a difference between the school snapshot SAT day and the data that we have provided specifically for the class of 22 when they graduate and move on. So we wanted to provide a little background and understanding around that snapshot day versus some of the data that follows the students and the class of 2022 beyond that snapshot. So that first chart talks about the SAT snapshot, which is in March when students are 11th graders. So you can see there are 3 years of cohort data or trend, I'm sorry, not cohort data, 3 years of 11th grade data over the course of 3 years. In 2020, as a reminder, the SAT was actually canceled. That was the COVID year. And then 2021 was the first year back. However, that was also hybrid, and the data was not as accurate as in years past. Last year in 2022, these are those graduating seniors. That is the achievement when they took the assessment in the 11th grade year. That is what you will see some of the state reports being published relative to other districts and our student achievement. We're happy to say that last year's Snapshot SAT Day ranked us #1 in the state for the evidence-based reading and writing assessment, and we ranked #3 in the state for math for SAT last year, which was great. Kudos to all of our teachers and students. Moving down to the cohort statistics. So now we're going to specifically talk about the class of 2022. So these are the data that we followed students from their senior year, their junior year, their senior year, and beyond. And then we also included the October assessment when they took the PSAT when they were sophomores. Correct? Yes. Okay. And so you'll see that starting when they were, they usually take that assessment early October, and it's the same group of students when we reference cohorts, so it's the same group of students over a 3-year period of time. We wanted to also make sure that you recognize that the SAT cohort summary chart looks a little bit different than the snapshot day because SAT can be administered more than once. In fact, College Board actually recommends that students take the SAT more than once because every time you take the assessment, your probability of increasing your scores go up. So the score and the data that's reflected in that chart is the most recent score that the student has taken after the first administration. So in many cases, students do take the assessment more than once after their junior year when they sit for that snapshot day for the state exam. We also included our ACT 3-year trend data as well. And Megan will talk a little bit further about AP exams and achievement as well. But before we move on, we wanted to just open the floor and see if there's any questions regarding the SAT snapshot day and the cohort data over the last 3 years.
I'm not sure I understand this chart, so
Sure.
maybe you can give me a little bit of clarification. So class of 2020 here, and then class of 2021, 2022. This is all for the graduated class of 2022. It's just when they took these exams, correct? Okay. I just
So
wanted
we
to-
added the title or the heading of that chart is class of. So when you think of a cohort, it's the same group of students that sat for that exam
Okay.
for when they started, when they were 2020 and moved on until 2022.
Okay, thanks.
And the need to take the SATs now?
Yeah, so Meredith is going to talk a little bit about some of the evolution of the different exams now and the way in which colleges are weighting certain exams over the other. And she'll mention that when she talks a little bit about that for college acceptance.
Thanks.
Just to give some,
Let me just clarify, I
Yeah.
just want to make sure. These are it's the class of 2020 taking that SAT,
right,
right? The class of 2021 taking the SAT, the class of 2022
Okay,
taking.
all right. That's why I was confused by the cohort statistics at the top and then showing all, I thought it was just a class of 2022. But that's not correct. It is a class of 2020,
It's
class of
each of those,
2021.
right, Meredith? I just want to make sure.
yeah.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
And just to
But
give,
that's their I'm
Yeah.
sorry to put that right here for
it's
today.
okay.
That's the summary of those students taking that SAT test.
So we're comparing class, like the class of 22 to the class of 20, class of 2021.
School day. That's the only snapshot.
Right, okay.
And just to give some clarity to the numbers, just as a reminder, the score ranges for SAT, there's two kind of categories of the SAT. You have the evidence-based reading and writing score, which ranges between 200 and 800. Then you have the math score, which also ranges from 200 to 800. In order to get your total score, you add those two numbers together, and that gives you the total overall score, which ranges from 400 to 1,600. If you look on College Board, it does provide you some comparisons from 2019, which states that the average SAT score nationally was 1,050. And so any score that would be above that value is perfectly acceptable for many colleges, and those that score in the 1,350 or above is in the 10 percentile, top 10% of all test takers, just to give you some clarity around the number.
Can you clarify, so I understand in 2021, there was only 64 students that took it. That's a result of it, COVID, it being canceled, it being optional?
Optional,
Optional,
right.
okay.
So in the district, those were the number of students that decided to take it.
Okay,
Correct? Yeah.
and then in 2022, all the students took it?
Now the state requires it again, and it is not optional, correct?
Okay. So if you,
Just to clarify, right, so that number, if you look at the snapshot day, that's the mandated, all 11th graders sit and take the exam. And then after that, they can take the exam again. And so you'll see that that number increases because many of our students do repeat and take the exam again, more than once. And so that average does change because the College Board takes the most recent score. Most recent score from when they sat, right. And so the average can either go up or go down.
so would it be fair to say that you kind of have to dismiss to some extent the 2021 results and really kind of compare 2020 and 2022 to really have some level of, not accuracy, but statistics that kind of,
Yeah. Is it fair to, sorry, is it fair to say that the most persistent students, right?
The students who are applying to the most highly competitive schools were taking the test that year. Those 64 students
okay.
represented that
That
sample.
was my, kind of my underlying question without asking it.
Yeah. You got
Was
it.
if you had any data on those 64 students and you just answered that question.
you got it.
Okay. And does that hold true for the ACT as well?
Yes, some colleges didn't waive that whole sitting, even schools for high schools, they for PSAT as well. A lot of the schools waived that assessment as part of their acceptance procedures.
To your question, I think that 2021 school, not I think, that 2021 school year, the students who were taking tests were the students who were applying to the most competitive schools where the tests were not optional, and they knew that that would positively influence their acceptance to both the SAT and the ACT.
So then, for the ACT for 2022, only 55 students took it. And how do you explain that? Or what's the data behind that?
I can kind of explain that. So if you look at going back to why the SAT increased, you have to remember, the state of Connecticut, has the students automatically take that exam. So that number is going to go up because the state of Connecticut is requiring it for all juniors. However, it's interesting, when you look at that ACT number, you can see when students were given the choice based on the differences in college admissions right now, students aren't taking as many tests as they used to on their own. So that's why there's a discrepancy there.
Also, just, hold on, just a little more color on this with the high number of students that took the ACT. Maybe you can tell me whether or not this is something you agree with. There's 120 students in 2020 that took it. That was also shortly after the ACT, or the SAT had completely revamped itself. So a lot more students moved over to the ACT at that stage, and now I think they're kind of migrating back. Is that correct? Is that what I mean, looks like we're seeing that here, but.
I would say that could be a fair statement, especially because of, the PSAT work and the state using the SAT now. I think students are going along more that track, so you can see that as well.
Okay.
Okay. We'll move on to the advanced placement scores, starting on page 4. So as you can see, over the 5 years, we've remained relatively consistent. We have, as you could see at the bottom there, in the class of 2022 and 2023, so these are typically juniors and seniors at Weston High School taking AP exams. And we had 57 AP scholars, 43 AP scholars with honor, 71 AP scholars with distinction, and 1 AP international diploma student. So performing very well at the AP level. Are there any questions on this page?
I had a question about the AP. If you're in an AP class, you're not required to take the AP exam, right?
You are not.
Okay. Do we have a sense as to how many or what percentage of our students in the AP classes take the AP
Yes.
exam?
So we're
Is
going
that
to
the
go
next
move
slide?
on to the next page. So this is the data for the number of AP classes that we offer, and as you can see, there's an asterisk on this page. There are some tests, AP tests, that we provide that the students actually don't take a course for at Weston High School. There are only a couple. You'll see Chinese language. We also had students take tests in Italian, German, and Japanese as well. And those are not offered at the high school, but students can study, do more of an independent study on their own, and then elect to take an AP exam. We also offer Computer Science A, as you could see, and Computer Science Principles. We offer those in alternating years so that we can help bolster the enrollment in those colleges or courses. And as we've talked about before, we do have a number of singletons, so this helps provide some more flexibility in student schedules as well by doing that. So you could see that our students perform very well. If you look at that bottom chart there, we have a total number of 283 AP students. We provided 808 total exams, and of those exams, we had 64% of our students scoring in that 4 and 5 range, which is very competitive. So overall, we have a very good statistics. I would want to highlight too, if you looked at Spanish language and culture AP, we have 9 out of our 10 students who took Spanish language and culture scoring a 5. So kudos to our AP Spanish teachers and students.
Do we know why a student wouldn't take an AP exam? Have we looked into it? I mean, is it fatigue, too many exams at the same time? Is there anything we can do to assist with the scheduling those? Are those statewide? Is it cost? I mean, why would somebody not take an AP exam?
So I think this also goes in line with some of the decrease we're seeing in some of the standardized testing as well in general. I can say our juniors, for the most part, are taking their AP exams. So our AP English language, our AP US history. If you're a junior, you're taking your AP exams in the hope that you can possibly use that for college admission if possible. Where we're seeing the decline in the last couple of years has been with our seniors. Some of our seniors, and I would not say it's a financial reason per se, because we do offer assistance for families who need that. It is more of less and less colleges taking the AP for credit. So, students are looking at that as, am I going to sit for this exam? This college is not going to take the credit. What's the point in me sitting for this exam at that point? So I can see that's where we've seen some decrease over the years, the last couple of years, I would say, per se.
Okay, we can move on to the application statistics now, right, Meredith?
Sure. So I just want to give a little bit of a background of the class of 2022. So class of 2022 was still a class that was affected from COVID. If you look at the college visits that we had at Weston High School, for example, for both of those falls, for the fall of 2020 and the fall of 2021, all of those visits were virtual. One positive, though, from the virtual visits is we had in each of those falls over 200 different colleges register to meet with our students because it made it very more flexible for the admission representatives and their schedules. So that was the nice thing about the virtual visits. We actually got a lot more of colleges on our schedule. In person, we have on average about 100 to 125 in person. So that gives you a little bit about their background. Also,
Excuse me, and you're back to in-person?
Sure. We are
Visits?
back to in-person this fall, yes. However, we did give the option for some admission representatives to still stay virtual for the afternoons. Some colleges are not traveling yet. So we wanted to make sure we gave access to everybody. So we do have some virtual if the college chooses to. Also, we had Camp College. So for those of you who are not familiar with Camp College, that is a program that the school counseling puts on for our rising seniors in August prior to their senior year. Students, it's 3 full days where the students will come in and they meet in virtually this year with admissions representatives who give them some tips and tricks about the admissions process, what to see on the application, some do's and don'ts that they like to give some advice on. They also will go through the whole common application while they're there. So they get registered and we go all the way through every single section to the essay. And then we also will have the English teachers come in, and the English teachers will have individual sessions with these students to go over their essays as well as their short answer questions. So that's a 3-day program. And so for the class of 2022, we had 68 seniors participate, which was great to see. So just giving you a little bit of background there for the class. So on page 7, you can see the application statistics for the classes of the last 3 years. But I want to go through a little bit of terminology when it comes to applications as well. So if you're not familiar, there are different programs for admission. There's early decision, which means you apply generally by November 1st, November 15th. If you apply early decision, you are a binding contract to go to that college if they accept you. And you hear back usually in early December. Early action is same November 1st, November 15th deadline. You hear back early December, however, you're not bound to go. You're just giving them your interest, but you're not committed. And then we also have regular decision, which is usually in January, and then rolling decision, which is an ongoing basis, usually starting in September, and they give decisions every 6 weeks. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about some specifics in that. When we look at the application statistics for the class of 2022, we did have a slight increase in total applications from the previous year. However, our average per student remains the same at around 7. For early decision, we had, and this is one thing that I think is similar to the last class, which is interesting for us. We had 86 students apply early decision in the class of 2022, which is equal to close to 44%. So if you think for the class of 2022, a lot of these students did not get to do in-person visits, on-campus visits. We still have a high number of students applying binding early decisions. So that's been interesting to me to see during COVID, because we saw that in last year's graduating class as well, the previous 2021, and that seems to be remaining true. 86. And that's either, early decision 1 or early decision 2. But that's, we're thinking, for a binding contract, we think that's kind of a high number still. So that's something that we're still seeing. For the other early programs who hear back, they're not bound, but they are applying November 1st, November 15th, hearing back in early December, we had 169 students out of the class of 2022 have at least one acceptance to an institution by December. So we think, that's a great number to hear. Before you go into regular decision, that percentage comes out to about 87% of the class. So 87% of the class had acceptances prior to the regular decision deadline. So we think that's also really important to mention as well. So now if you turn to page 8, this is turning to the student outcomes. Okay, now the students have their decisions, and what are they doing after they have their acceptances? And I can say on this chart, we still have seen the class of 2021, 2022.
Meredith, I think, I'm just,
Oh,
you
sure.
have a different, your pages are numbered differently.
I'm
So
sorry.
you're on page, they're on page 7
Oh,
with you. I
sorry.
just want to make sure
This
that
is page
everyone's
7.
with you.
Got it. Thank you. So on page 7, you can see the student outcomes. So if you look at the class of 2021 and 2022, I think of note is we still are seeing a little higher number than usual of undecided. And I think that that kind of goes along with the COVID times and students not sure exactly what path they'd like to take after high school. It's come down a little bit from the previous graduating class, but I think for us, that's still something that we're seeing, students just trying to figure out what their decisions really are and where they see themselves after graduating high school. So that's something that we still see. Also, a little slightly higher for the class of 2022 were students going to public institutions. And I think interesting of note is the majority of these public institutions are out of the state of Connecticut. So I think it's interesting that our students are paying out-of-state tuition versus going to some of our in-state institutions. So I think that that was, a little something that I've noticed in that chart as well. And then for you guys, I believe it's page 8 of the report for the selectivity. This goes back to the Barron's rankings and talks about how our students do to the most competitive and highly competitive institutions. I think our numbers still are pretty high compared to, I know Barron's likes to say the most competitive is really 10 to 20% acceptance, and to several of the institutions on this list, the acceptance rate is under 5%. So I think our students are still performing very high at these schools, these selective schools. And what we did for you on the following pages, we put down the college matriculation, so where the students of the class of 22 ended. And we put some asterisks next to them so you can see which ones fall into those categories of our students and which ones they're actually at currently. And I think lastly, I would like to say about the college matriculation, I think, we have to keep in mind that, students and families make these decisions for various reasons. Sometimes it's field, location, size, could be financial, could be program-based. And I think it's really impressive when we see our students and the size of classes that we have, the variety of schools our students wind up at. I think it's kind of nice to see some of the diversity here in some of the locations and the programs. And I think, again, just to wrap up, I think that the class of 22 had another very successful year in the college admissions process.
I would agree. I think we did have a really successful year.
So getting back to my question about the SATs, has that changed?
So it's still in flux. I will tell you that some of our most competitive colleges out there have gone back to requiring test scores. So for example, MIT is now requiring test scores again. I would say that the tier schools right under that are still evaluating the situation. A lot of them are still test optional this year. However, they want more data from the students that they have on campus to see how they perform, to see how they're going to proceed in the future. So my gut is that we're going to see more and more schools stay test optional, but they have not made those final decisions yet. They want more data from their side first.
And it's test optional in your day-to-day job? Can you see a difference in how schools evaluate students who choose to take the SATs versus who don't? I mean, what do they look for if they choose not to take the test?
So what they're doing is they're giving a lot more weight to the student's transcript, the courses they enroll in, and the grades that they received, as well as the essay questions. It's not just that main essay, especially for a lot of our competitive colleges out there, it's those supplemental essay questions, and that's really how they're evaluating the student. The colleges keep on telling us, and I know it's interesting because parents will say the same thing to us, but if they really say they're test optional and someone else sends their scores, are my student really they're going to be negatively impacted? And the admissions people come back saying they're not going to be negatively impacted. do not wonder why they didn't send their scores. You know, we're really looking at more of the transcript and the other credentials. I think as a matter of rule, what the colleges are saying to students and families, if you fall in the higher than 50% of what we're looking for test scores, send them. However, if you're not and you don't feel comfortable saying your scores, don't, and it's not going to be a negative. And I think, you know, it's something that we're working with our students and our families on, and truly believing that message, because we can see it. We can see where that's true.
So does that make your job a bit more difficult to make sure that the colleges know about the quality of education at Weston versus, you know, the whole panoply of other school or other high schools that kids apply from to, you know, globally?
I'd say fortunately, Weston High School does have a great reputation. However, the colleges are very smart when they do this. They have admissions representatives assigned to certain areas, and part of their job is to know their area, to know all the schools are in that area. So when they're making their decisions about, you know, students and comparing from one school to another school within the same state, they know the level of rigor. We have a school profile that we present to all of them, and we also make relationships with a lot of these individuals. You know, when they come now to visits and so on, they get to know us that way as well. But they're definitely very well versed about our high school and what our offerings are, and our level of rigor in this area.
Great, thanks.
Meredith, maybe you could just for a moment take the opportunity to explain, because these are recorded and people watch, about our college and career counselor, Ms. Green. And, you know, we are very fortunate to have that and to have the support from the community to have that position, because not all high schools in our district do. So can you talk to us a little bit about her role this fall and, her role in general, but especially this fall?
Sure, I think I take it for granted because she's been with us for a couple of years. But yeah, for those of you who do not know, our college and career counselor, Miss Randy Green, she is a certified school counselor in this area. And so she works just with our juniors and our seniors. Her process starts with juniors in December, where we do our junior college kickoff. From that point, she meets with all students and their families to do individual college counseling meetings. And she, from them, obviously, will meet with students and families based on their needs after that. They go on visits and what other things that they need. She's also involved in our programming for our juniors and our seniors. She's also the one who runs our Camp College. She also goes on several workshops and visits and conferences where all of our admissions representatives are. So she has a lot of great relationships with them. She knows a lot of people, which is great too. When we do programming, we bring people in, so it's been very beneficial as well. Because it's really nice to note, because in a lot of, especially in some of our area schools, that position is a paraprofessional. So I think that it's good to know that we, you know, to note that we have that certified school counselor on staff to meet with our students.
And doesn't she also work with, and I know she's done presentations and with the PTOs, and also work, because December, right, when people find the results, a lot of our students find their early decision. It can be a stressful time, and we are, you know, we think about that and how best to make our students, whatever news they get, that they still feel valued, and, you know, that they're going to find a place. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, what she does?
Sure, she sends out a really nice email, you know, to families about how to handle the decisions that your students are receiving. You know, because obviously we know, you know, it can be a very tough time to receive rejections for some of our students. It's the first time they've had a rejection, so it's like, how do we handle that? You know, so she really talks really nicely about to the families about, you know, how to take those in, how to handle those situations, how to look forward, how to, you know, to look at the positive, and also too, I have to say, one thing that she does, which I think is great too, is when she's working with families and helping them create their list, she really tries very hard to make sure these are good lists for the families, because she wants to make sure there's not going to be too many rejections on there. When she talks about some students who may have too many reaches on their list, she'll tell families, it's hard to hear that no. And we don't want your student to hear all these no's. Like, we know these are reaches. So she actually works through that when she is counseling with families as well, so we don't have to have that much rejection. So I think that's great when she does that too. It can be sometimes hard to hear, but she's very honest, and I think it's great, and we appreciate that, and we value that. So she does kind of prep families and students for those decisions. Also, as a note too, with our programming, we're looking at bringing in some speakers. I think our families are definitely well versed in colleges and application processes. However, I think we are looking more to bring some speakers in who can talk a little bit more about the social emotional part of it and applying to colleges at such a high level and kind of how to handle that. So we're actually looking at some programming in the future for that as well.
Could you talk a little bit about the scholarship process and how many of our students are seeking scholarships and how they go about that? And I don't know if maybe we could get an update another point in time about how many students were accepted for scholarships and, thinking about the financing part of college.
Sure. So we do actually put on a presentation every October. Actually, we partner with Barnum Financial, who does a financial aid presentation, kind of the overall process, but we also talk a little bit about scholarships. So in regards to scholarships, obviously we have your merit-based scholarships and your need-based scholarships. The merit-based scholarships are a little harder to track just because those letters go directly to the students when they're admitted. So students are automatically considered for merit aid when they apply, and it's up to the admissions office to award packages to those students with their admissions or acceptance letter. And then there is the need-based, where the students will be filling out the FAFSA form or the CSS profile, depending on the school, and based on, obviously, their financial information, the government gives them that estimated family contribution and what the government thinks the family can afford at that point. And so it does vary, from school to school on how many people can meet that financial aid and how much merit money a student can get. However, I have to say that's another thing where Randy's that really great vault of information. She really has a pretty good idea of college to college, where they have some more money in certain situations. So she also helps our students who are talking to her in that process, like guide them to some schools that could give them a little bit more than some others. So I think that's where she's great in that area too.
I have two questions. They're somewhat related, but if we can go back to our page 8, where there's the most competitive colleges and highly competitive colleges, it looks like there's a fairly low admitted rate percentage on the mostly competitive. My first question relative to this is, would students who apply to highly competitive, they would not be included? Like, for example, the 205 2022 graduates that applied to highly competitive, they're not included in the 368. And that's a question, so I'm stating it as a fact, but I'm asking a question.
No, that's okay. Actually, you will have overlap. So you'll have some students who are applying to most competitive and highly at the same time.
Okay. So how do you, where does the bulk, seems like you are expecting this, where does the bulk of our students tend to apply? Is it?
And I have to say this, the reason why we usually report on these categories is this is, I would say a good percentage of our students are applying to at least one school in these two categories. I think, however, this can be tricky to track sometimes because, again, like I'm talking about, especially for the most competitive category, I think that one can be the most wide range. For example, like I said, there's some schools that will accept under 5%. So that one, and that's hard from year to year because you have schools that have their own agendas, right? And they have their class that they want to build. And so there's some variables that we just can't control. So I think, it's nice to report how well we do to some of these schools. I think, unfortunately, with the fluctuation sometimes from year to year, it's kind of hard to kind of say exactly why that is.
Okay. And the reason I ask is, and I have one other question, the reason I ask is because I don't want the kids who are probably the largest group in the middle that apply to the most competitive colleges to sort of be forgotten because we have a lot of kids that take AP courses. I mean, I think there's no question that I think for one of our past meetings we're trying to limit how many kids get into honors because everyone can't be an honors student, right? So I was just concerned that we're not, or making sure we're not forgetting about probably the largest percentage of our student population, which is maybe applying into the most competitive versus the highly. My other question is, when I look at the
David,
list
can
of,
I just respond to that really
Yeah.
quickly? I think we were really conscious this year when we were reporting out in this report. In previous years, we had listed all of the schools in that most competitive category and all of the schools in the highly competitive category. So we listed all those schools, then we provided the data, then we provided the list of the schools that our students were accepted to. And so in really evaluating that and looking at the message that we're sending to students and to all students, we determined that we were going to take out those two prior lists, right, and not focus and say, because those lists and where they are placed in this report indicate that's what's most important, and what we want to put the person first, right, and honor each school that each student is choosing to go to, or whatever that student's post-secondary plan is. So we really consciously removed those two lists, provided the data, and then put the list of all of our students and asterisk those two categories, so that we wanted to honor everyone's choices in the process.
okay, and my one other question, or last question is, so as the college counselor talks to the students about where they may want to move on to, is there a kind of a loop back into the principals or the superintendent for types of courses that students may have wanted to be exposed to or taken in high school but didn't have the opportunity to? I don't know if that's, like, because you have, do most of these students know what they, I presume not, but what they want to go on to? So they're sort of going into college best fit based on criteria, nice weather, ski, whatever. Like, how do you, when you help students determine what college would be best for them, are there courses or classes that?
So there's a couple of things. So we do some surveys with them to kind of look at their strengths and weaknesses and also areas of interest. We do career clusters and things like that. So we do some research with them to kind of, and tell them, oh, based on this results, you should probably look into these electives. What electives in our curriculum align with that? So we do have those conversations as well. I think, that we try to tell our students is try to expose themselves to as much as they can, because even though we feel like sometimes our students need to know exactly what they're doing when they leave here, statistically, nationwide, that's still not the trend. It's like 60% of students going to college undecided still. So, as much as we would love for them to know exactly what they want to do, I think our job is also to expose them to just different opportunities. And then when they get there, hopefully, obviously they'll go to a school that has enough opportunities when they find that way, to kind of make that decision.
Can I ask one last question? So if there's a student that if a student doesn't get accepted at a particular school that you thought he or she were qualified for, do you ever go back to the university or the college and ask why they weren't accepted?
One thing we do is our college and career counselor does make early calls. She will reach out to institutions of all students that applied early action or early decision, and she will try to get some information based on trends that they're seeing and give us some advice based on that. There's not all institutions that will participate that. We're seeing less and less institutions doing that. However, it is some good data for us to get, because we're getting to see, it actually helps us with our current seniors know, okay, well, this is what the schools are saying early. Now we know what to do for regular. So that's some information that we do gather.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just have a couple questions. I saw, or you said during this presentation that the average student is applying to maybe seven schools about. Do we poll the students as to how successful they feel that the process was for them? I'm just curious, how we know, I mean, we're saying based on some of these results that it's successful, but, maybe somebody doesn't feel that way themselves. Do we track that at all?
That is something that we're going to go back to this year, now that we're back in our regular programming. We do usually a senior exit survey. So we did that prior to COVID, and we're going to be going back to gathering more of that information this year. We asked about, very similar to that question that you asked, how do they feel overall about their acceptances and things of that nature. So yes, we're going to go back to that.
Okay, terrific. My other question was, and you touched on some of this, but I just want to make sure that if you had more to say on the subject, that you have that opportunity. What trends are you seeing in the college application process post-COVID? I mean, when I think about some of our families with, children that aren't in high school yet, and they are hearing, what you're hearing on the news about how everything's so different, what advice can we tell them as they're thinking about preparing their kids for middle school and high school?
I think it's trying to go back to the process as we used to know it. I think that the last couple of years made a lot of people nervous and anxious about the process, and I think that's why we saw all these people think, oh, let me just throw out an early decision, and I'll be fine, and I'll be okay. I think we need to really make sure people do their research again, making sure it's best fit. Like, I think in going back to that rule of what's the best fit for you, I think we need to look back at that. Because we did have some students the last couple of years look to transfer, and they admitted, well, I never visited the campus, but I was nervous, and I just thought this would be my best option. So I think if we can bring it back to almost a little bit kind of like it was in that sense, like, why are you choosing the colleges that are on your list? What research have you done? How do you think this fits you? I think that would be the most helpful.
I was going to ask a couple questions. Thank you. I had three questions, and they're actually planting a seed for some of the efforts that we'll talk about a little later this evening. One is, do you track if students take sort of pre-college courses during the summer, so they have a specific interest? Like University of Connecticut offers a variety of courses. Secondly, do you track those that opt to take on apprenticeships for like the trade? It would be really interesting to see if that's presented and taken advantage of. And a third, you also track who's granted athletic scholarships at some extent.
So I can speak a little bit to some of the programs our students are doing. So we do actually have even some juniors right now who are taking advantage of the free courses at NCC. So we do have some students who take advantage of those programs, and obviously some online programs of some of the universities. They will provide us with transcripts. So I think of a way of tracking, that would be one way, because they provide the transcript to us so we can upload it into Naviance for their application. That's one way we're notified, and they also report that on their applications as well. We do have some students that we're helping through transition. Working on different avenues. I have a student who's doing a entrepreneur course because he wants to start his own business and go to Lincoln Tech. So we do have our transition coordinator who works really well with students on that as well. And then as far as our athletes, obviously I think Randy, our college and career person, is more involved with that. Just working with our students. It's not something that we can list in Naviance per se. It's not a data point that we can necessarily check off. However, when we're looking at our results and advising families, we do know our students who do fall into those categories as well. But we do work with families who work with coaches early on in the process and kind of talking to them about the recruitment piece, however, as well as the academic application piece, and making sure they're both, working well together.
To my eye, this paints a pretty great picture. It's especially the most competitive colleges category. If you flip the page, you're looking at like Princeton, Duke, Amherst, things like this. So 33% admittance rate is pretty remarkable, especially there's this almost exact reversion of the same number 2 years later to the 30%. So that feeds into my question, which is I just want to make sure I don't have the numbers wrong on highly competitive colleges, because that second column, it's the only number that goes up actually. So you have 205 applications, 316 acceptances. Am I reading that incorrectly? That's the only number where the second one is larger, actually.
So I think if you look at that one, I think if you look at the story, we have students, we had less applications to that category. And if you look at the decisions that were made by those students, they were pretty good decisions. And so I think that's why the percentage is different there. And then if you look at, you also mentioned the most competitive. I think what happened with the class of 2021, we had even more students apply early decision that year, which were guaranteed admits to those colleges. And the colleges also weren't sure, and they took those guaranteed students. So I think that's why we also had that higher number in 2021 for the most.
So but in 2022, under highly competitive colleges, there were 205 applications and 316 acceptances? That's the part I'm confused about. Am I reading that? Maybe I'm reading it wrong. Anyway, it's 65% admitted, so there's a big jump actually from even 2020. You have it's one of the only numbers in this whole report that actually post the pandemic it actually went even higher. So do you have any insight into why it looks like that even better admission rate 2022 for the highly competitive?
I think I'd have to look at some individual students to kind of look and see. I think my first gut reaction would be the students who are applying to those schools really did their research and really, were well suited for those schools. I mean, that's our that's what we're trying to. That's our goal. We want students to have success in the process, and we try to really work with them on making sure their lists are where they are. So that would be my first gut, but I could look at some particular students just to see as well.
Good numbers, so thank you.
I have a quick question for you. So a lot of this hinges on the application, and the application process hinges on Randy. That's a lot. She has to deal with the seniors and the juniors. Has she got the resources she needs in her department because I mean, as her reputation, in town gets around, and as parents get to know more about her, they're going to rely upon her more. And so does she have the resources that she needs to be successful in this position? Because this position is a really important one for us. Matriculation sheets matter a lot. So
I think she does. She definitely would tell me if she didn't, so I feel like she does. She does very good about the way she positions who she works with when throughout the school year. And that's why, I know and I'm sure some junior families would love to start meeting with her early, but she really doesn't meet with them until after our December kickoff, because she wants to make sure that those senior applications are in, the lists are good. So she really makes sure that her time is spent well through each of those two grade levels at the right time. And we also meet with her too, which is good too. The counselors are all still part of the process. It's not just her, doing it on her own. We all still work as a team, which is great. They don't always need to just meet with her. They can meet with us as well for a quick question. And I have to say, with the way things are going, she gets close to, I would say, 95% of each grade at the end of each year of meeting individually with all students and families. And, and she seems to be good with it.
I used some quick Common Core math.
Yeah.
I think
We switched
yeah,
the numbers.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, come on, I carried numbers, I had groups.
Just wanted to steal your thunder.
You can up the quality of the college you're going to apply to, David.
I'll show my work.
Right, 316 applicants and 205 acceptances. Yeah, which is 65%.
Are there other questions? Great, thank you. District literacy update? Thanks.
So real briefly, just wanted to give a quick update around the District Literacy Committee. To give some prior context, the state of Connecticut in July of this past summer, after a year of analysis and review with a outside company, the state of Connecticut has adopted new state guidelines requiring all districts in the state of Connecticut to adopt one of 6 core curricular programs in July 1 of this coming summer in 2023. So as a result, we established a district literacy committee. It includes about 25 representatives from the district in Weston, K through 8. It spans teachers, administrators, special education administrators and teachers, curriculum and instruction leaders to help vet these different programs and align to understand which one or few align to our current practices so that we can maintain our current levels of student achievement and accelerate them even further. And we have met internally to begin an audit and review process of our current resources and tools that we have aligned to the new state guidelines that require districts to evaluate their resources and their current curriculum around the phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, word study, and a variety of other different components that are evaluated by the state of Connecticut relative to our current practices and resources. From there, members of the District Literacy Committee attended a day-and-a-half review of the 6 programs, and as a result, we identified 2 of the 6 programs that we would like to further review in more detail. Each of those 2 companies will be coming to Weston to provide a detailed presentation to our whole District Literacy Committee so that we can evaluate them further and identify which one would be a best fit for Weston. That will occur in the first week of December. It is required that all districts tentatively identify which curriculum that they will be adopting on December 16th to the state of Connecticut, and from there we can begin the process of further auditing our current curricular resources, areas that we need further review or analysis, and then also begin to discuss professional development and rollout for the following school year. Although it is a pre-K to 3 mandate, we are looking at it as a pre-K to 8 adoption because we want to ensure continuity across the grade levels. We want to ensure that we're not only looking at the components of the science of reading and the different areas that we are required to include in our curricula, but also looking at text complexity, a variety of texts based on interest, so that we can continue to build our students' love for reading in the classroom so that there's choice, as well as the components around the science of reading to teach reading for all levels. Any questions on that?
Not a question, just a comment. So we spoke about this quite a bit in the curriculum committee meeting, and I just wanted to add that although this started as a mandate, it sounds like there's a lot of excitement about the opportunity of improvement in some of these programs and the good things that it'll bring to what we're already doing. So I know a lot of times when we hear things coming down from the state, there's a weight to that information, but in looking at it through more detail and some of the things we spoke about, it sounded like there are definite opportunities for us to improve what we offer.
Yeah, I would agree. Just to elaborate, I think the team was very apprehensive going into the review process because we have a lot of success in Weston, but we know that we have areas that we can always improve. And so after further review, the members of the teams that actually went to the day-and-a-half evaluation of the 6 programs, everyone, actually, all of us agreed with no conversation, we did not have any pre-bias on before entering the review process. And at the end, we all came together and ironically, all of us identified the same top 2 programs that we wanted to evaluate a little further that would enhance what we currently do. And that's the ultimate goal, to your point, is to look for resources to enhance our practice and provide more areas of depth and understanding around the science of reading and how to teach reading for all students at all levels.
Other questions, comments? The next, Lisa, is enrollment.
Thank you, Steve. The state reporting enrollment, October 1st is the date of the official enrollment for the district, and I think you have the chart in front of you. The difference in the enrollment from last October to this October is 40 students. One thing that it's important to note is that the state reporting does include the outplay students. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's been a long day. Sorry. Would you like me to repeat all that? The chart is here. The October 1st, 2022 state reporting enrollment. That is the official enrollment date that is reported to the state, October 1st. And in comparing from last year, 2021, you can see that there is a difference of 40 students. One thing I want to point out, and I hope I didn't misspeak at a different meeting, but the note at the bottom is really important, that the October numbers include both the building as well as the 21 outplay students that we have, and it is 21 this year. The other piece that is important is that the numbers have not been totally accepted by the state yet. The final number will be ready in Phase 2. And maybe, Dan, you can elaborate a little bit on that. Because it is a process. I think it's not as simple as, okay, what's in for October 1st? These are the numbers, put them in.
Yeah, so the October 1st collection by the state is the most important collection that we send to the state. It doesn't just include enrollment information, but it includes a lot more than that: attendance, behavior, all that stuff. It's a back and forth. So the report isn't due until the end of October. It's as of October 1st of that school year. We provide all the information to the state. That's part of the Phase 1 collection. Phase 2 is when they come back if they have any questions to verify any of the information regarding any of the students or any of the data that we have uploaded. And so it's a back and forth before they fully verify all of the information. But this is the most accurate. This is the reason why there's a little bit of a waiting game to make sure that we have all of the information proper. We go over everything with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible. And then that also includes conversations with other schools for the outplay students to make sure that we have all of our information proper with them. So that's why it takes a little while for us to provide everybody with the October 1st enrollment data, because it's part of a roll-up for the Phase 1 collection to the state.
Thank you. There's something I'd like to mention for our new board member, as well as the public that can be watching, and that is why the average class size is important. We do have board guidelines regarding class size, and for grades K through 1, those guidelines are 18 to 20. You will note that we were one short right now in first grade, that the sections are at 17. We talked a lot about this, didn't we, Laura, over the summer? And it was a feeling that that was important to not go up and have first grade at the higher end of the sections. And can you elaborate why, Laura, that is important? Especially in that grade level.
Yes, first grade is a critical year for foundational skills. It's typically when students take the beginning skills around reading and start to put them together, and is really when the reading takes off in that year. It's also a critical year for foundational skills for math, as well as all the other content areas.
And I think coming out of COVID.
Coming out of COVID as well, yes.
That was
the
a
students
concern.
in first grade were impacted in preschool, so.
Exactly. And then you can look grades 2 through 5, the class guidelines for those grades are 20 to 24, and we're within them based on the sections. I want to draw your attention that, there was an increase in preschool. We have 5 sections of preschool this year, and that was also a result of, these are kids that are in the Birth to 3 program, correct, Tracy? And then they join our preschool program. We are not sure what next year will bring, if there will be 5 sections or less, but we look very closely at this enrollment. And the Birth to 3, perhaps you can explain, where do these kids come from? How do, how are we informed by the state?
Sure. So these are students who are living in Weston. Birth to 3 provides in-home support for students who qualify for those services. It could be in a number of areas: communication, fine motor skills, kind of pre-academic cognitive skills. And what happens is on or before a child's 3rd birthday, we assume responsibility for that educational plan from birth to 3. So no later than the day the child turns 3, which they could join the class in October, they could join the class in March. It's all based on their birthday. We convene a PPT. We conduct often our own evaluations, although sometimes the birth to 3 evaluations have been updated. We determine if that student is eligible for special education, and if they are eligible, we commence services within our program, usually right around their birthday. We don't typically start much earlier than that.
Thank you. On December 5th, we will have the special board meeting, and there'll be a full presentation on enrollment. We are looking very carefully at this enrollment and the projections, as Steve said earlier in the meeting, it will also tie into the optimization committee and the work that we do with that and looking carefully at enrollment trends. Any questions?
I have a question, probably
Sure.
for Dan. Why is it, this is just my not understanding, why is it so difficult to figure out how many students we have in our schools? Is it, like you talk about discrepancies between what the state has, what we have, wouldn't it just be, again, I understand I'm oversimplifying it, but just go to the classrooms and count how many kids you see. Like, seriously, why is this so complicated that we have so many passes to go through, and then finally December, we're like, this is right?
The majority of it is the outplay students.
Okay.
So the report for the internals, the students who are enrolled in one of our 4 buildings, that's easy enough. But from a perspective of, there are some outplacements where they then take over the attendance, but they still are considered part of us, like CES, for instance, right? So it's a split hybrid. So a second collection takes place on attendance. They're still ours, but if we happen to have students at CES reports their attendance. So you see how it can get a little confusing? Because, wait, are they ours or are they theirs? Well, they're both.
Right, so they're ours, but they don't physically come to our buildings, and therefore we're waiting to find out from CES, for example, how many Weston students are being educated at CES.
Well, yeah, it's a cross-reference. So if we tell the state that we have X amount of students at CES, then they look at CES and they say CES is reporting X amount of students at Weston because CES reports to the state as well. But then there are other outplaced facilities that are treated differently than CES. So it just depends on the outplacement. So that's why the case-by-case basis is what causes a lot of verification, double verification, us communicating with the outplaced facility to confirm all of the numbers line up, when they were outplaced, all that stuff. So the majority of the time it's spent on the outplaced students.
Okay, and then relative to outplaced students, so the October, on the bottom, the little asterisk, the 21 outplaced students, but that number is included, or are those 21 students included in the 2,202 students? So,
Yes.
right, so the number of students actually attending our buildings would be reduced by 21?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay.
So, as we move forward to try to determine the physical structure of our schools, can we get a number of students, forget the way it's reported to the state, just the number of number of students physically at our premises?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, we can do that. So we can run enrollment reports at any point in time from Power School. But that's why we say this is the most accurate, because it includes the outplaced students who are still considered our students. But if you're looking for students just enrolled physically in the buildings, that's absolutely something we can get for you for determinations for the Educational Optimization Committee.
I mean, I'm talking for myself, but to me, that seems the number we're really looking for, and we can look at the outplaced students just in a different fashion. I mean, I don't know if they flow in and out. If they're outplaced, do some come back into the system, into the physical location?
Yes, is the short answer to that question. I mean, I'm sure we can present numbers in both formats, but I just want to underscore from like a special education PPS standpoint, it's very important that we continue to see those students as our students.
I'm not suggesting we don't. I'm just trying to suggest that, if we're planning for a building with
We need to know how many chairs
how many,
to fill.
exactly, to your point.
Right? CES is filling some chairs for us and other programs. So I think, would it be wildly different than just simply subtracting roughly 21 from the 2,202? Again, am I oversimplifying it?
Well, you'd want to subtract it by the grade as well, right? So the 21 are
Right.
interspersed in between all the grades.
Right. Okay.
So, but to underscore what Tracy's saying, I get that at this snapshot in time, but that number could be fluid. So the 21 outplace could be less.
Or more.
or more.
Yeah, that's fine.
So as long as that's kept in mind, that we still have to treat them as our students, and that they could potentially come back to us at
Well,
any
there
given
are
point.
students from a budgetary point of view.
At 100%, yep.
And when you say they come back to us potentially partially, partway through the school year?
Sometimes, we also sometimes have students change placements during the school year. So that's another reason why the process can take some time at the beginning of the year. Not all students start in an out-of-district placement on day one of the school year. They sometimes begin with us and have difficulty and need to transition out, and the reverse is true. Sometimes we have students who are doing really well, and we can position them up so that we can create kind of a transition plan, maybe in the second semester, where they are having some phased-in visits to our building and then transition back to attending on a full-time basis. Our goal, obviously, is to educate students here, and there are just circumstances that warrant something different for various reasons.
So it probably would be helpful if you do put the data together that Steve's asking for, which I think, again, oversimplifying, how many chairs do we need to provide so kids have a place to sit, would be also historically statistical information over the past 3 or 5 years, how many students in September were being educated inside our facility, and how many left and came back, so that we have some knowledge of, yeah. So I think, right, I assume that data's out there, how many have come and gone.
Yeah,
during the
you
course
mean
of
a shift throughout a year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think some historical, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. I think probably Tracy would be able to say this is, if it happens when they move from, middle, Hurlbut, the grades, whatever. But I think some historical data would be helpful to know how many seats might we have to provide for during shifts.
Sure.
Just out of curiosity, is the 21, how does that compare to years past? The 21 out-of-place students?
It's a little bit higher. I think we were at 18 last year. And there's reasons behind those increases. But comparable, but a little bit higher.
Okay, and then, I don't know how granular we want to get with this, or should we wait until the December meeting to kind of really dig into the numbers? Mind if I ask a couple of questions about the numbers specifically?
Ask your question.
Ask your question, and if we
And then you'll tell you if we're gonna
think we need to defer till December,
Okay.
we will.
The number for the pre-K that, kind of like exploded, is this because we're seeing a large number of children who are being, larger than normal number of children who are being identified by the state as needing special services and who qualify for the preschool, correct? That's why we have we talked about this in the past, that's why we have the multiple sections. Clearly, the neurotypical or average developmental, I don't know how you want to refer to that, they've filled in the spaces to make it a nice mix in the preschool, as we aim to have for the children. Are we still, was there still a wait list as we closed off the 5 sections?
We, as of this moment, we have been able to accept any general education peer models who have expressed interest in the program.
And do we have room for more? Or are we full at capacity?
It depends on the class. So in some classes, no. There is some space in the 3s, not really in the 4s at this point. And we're expecting, to go back to my earlier comments about birth to 3, the number of identified students who are in our 3s program right now is not the number that we're going to end the school year with. Like, I got a referral today, for example, for a student who's going to be joining us in a couple of months. That has been ongoing throughout the school year, and it will continue.
I guess the reason I'm asking too is because what I'm trying to get an understanding of is whether or not this is something that is going to be trending forward, or whether or not this is something for example, we're down 40 students in the district, but just if you take a look at 2 grades alone, between kids who transitioned from 8th grade to 9th grade, we lost 10 kids, right? If you go from the 2021 8th graders at 191 and suddenly went down to, this year they're freshmen and it's at 181. So we lost 10 kids, and that's not abnormal for a public school to lose 10 kids going into high school, boarding school, private school, whatever it is. And then we look at the cohort that we had for the class of 2022, which historically, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but historically 2022's class was a large cohort going through the system, right? because if you look at that, we've lost 27 students from the class of 22 as seniors to the class of 2023. So those two groups together are a total of 30 students that we've lost of, 37 students out of this 40 negative. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, as 2022 is a little bit of a bubble going through, is that what we're looking for? Is that what we're seeing, or is this something that you're seeing it trending in the threes as well? I guess if you can, is there any color you can give to that?
Yeah, so I monitor the birth to 3 information pretty much on a weekly basis. Remember, that data for next school year is very preliminary at this point because we're talking about very young children. Families have to be already saying or asking questions. I think my child isn't developing as I would expect them to be developing at this age, and they need to talk to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician, there's a whole process that needs to happen between the interval really of age 1, 1.5, and 3. Our preliminary numbers for birth to 3 projections for next year look a little bit lower than our numbers did for this year. I'm cautious to rely on those totally right now because it is so early. I will continue to watch those as we move into budget season and plan for next year. It is not a significant drop-off. We are not at the numbers that I was seeing the year before last year in terms of budget planning, but it does at this moment look a little bit lower than the numbers I was looking at last November, December for what's now this school year.
Okay, all right.
Can I just piggyback onto a question that Sharon was asking? I'm going to. So we talked about outplacement. And so with the huge number of students enrolled in pre-K and 4, because of the influx, I presume it's an influx of students that moved to Weston who the state has said, okay, they're identified, it's your responsibility now to educate them now that they're over 3. Do you have a sense of how many of these students we're going to be able to educate next year, or are we going to find ourselves in a situation where we have to outplace them? And on a related note, are there things that we can be doing? So I know we have, what's the program called? Where we're trying to get the kids to stay in district, right? Not to have to be outplaced, so offer the services.
Alternative pathways at the high school?
So that's not at that age level though, right? So at the age level of the pre-K at 4, do you have a sense of, are we going to be able to educate these children next year in our district, or are we going to be faced with a significant number of these students being asked to be outplaced or being required to be outplaced?
Yeah, that's a tricky question for me to answer. I mean, placement is a PPT decision, it's a team decision. We are meeting all the needs of all of those students in the district right now. If we are not at some point in time, it's our obligation to do something different. I can tell you that early intervention is successful. There's a lot of research to support the efficacy of that. I'm encouraged by the fact that we have students attending our programs. They're receiving high-quality services from special education teachers, speech and language pathologists, OTs, PTs, and our goal is to keep them in the Weston public schools, and we're going to continue to do that. Now, is a student need going to emerge in preschool or otherwise? If I could figure that out in advance, we'd be in a different, that would be very helpful to know that. But the reality is that needs change, and what students need evolves over time. But I'm hoping that all of those students will stay with us.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is because, as Sharon was sort of saying, with the large number of kids that are in the pre-K program, her question was more along the lines of, are they going to matriculate through our system, right? And I guess the intent and the hope would be yes, that we can educate these children in district, so the numbers would start matriculating through. So my question was, is there any sense or any way to figure out how many of those students would matriculate through versus how many of those students potentially would have to be outplaced?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I could give you a solid answer, but.
Are there other questions? Let's move on to the October 22 2022 financial report.
Just to give some quick updates for October, we have two drivers or two identified areas of savings. First one has to do in our property services, $46,247. You may recall last year we had some discussions surrounding prepaying off a lease that we had from some security equipment from future years. That is $46,000. You'll also recall that we discussed that for transportation that we learned quite a bit from COVID. We had some data from COVID when we were combining our buses, which led us to believe that we could reduce the fleet from 22 to 21. We have reduced the fleet to 21, and I think we have done so quite successfully. We have not seen any impacts at all to the home-to-school transportation or in any disruption to or any addition to the length of time that students are on buses. So we have an 83,417, which represent a cost to operate one bus at a gross level for one school year. That's it on the financials. Just to just tie in on the internal service fund. Our internal service fund is trending as we anticipate. We are also trending to the historical norms as well. Any questions on the financials? Want to move on to the lease. Just to remind the board as well, we have.
So we need to take a vote on the, and accept your report. Can I have a motion to accept the financial report for October 2022?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the fiscal year 23, October 2022 financial report.
I second.
Jody, do you want to? Aye.
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 Thank you. Bill?
Moving on to the lease. We are in year one of a multi-year technology replacement cycle. The current plan calls for a leasing of technology equipment. We did go out to bid quite recently. We received 3 proposals from First American, K State Bank, and from TD. Based on the nominal rate and also which is ultimately the total finance rate, we are recommending that we do lease the equipment, the first phase of our equipment from First American. The amount financed will be slightly less than we anticipated. We had favorable pricing for some of the equipment that we had on the list for this year. So recommendation is to go with First American for the first phase of our lease. Any questions on the lease?
Yeah, I actually want to ask about a couple things on this. So forgive me if I'm walking us back about the actual component parts here, but a question I have is, a lot of the components are, there's smart tablets, there's Chromebooks, there's desktops, iMacs, et cetera. Is it possible to disentangle any of those items?
Sure, I'm going to defer on that question to Dan.
So could you elaborate a little bit further what you mean?
Let me actually lead with the question that's behind it. So we have 150 Chromebooks for grade 2, 150 iPads for grade 1, and I guess I'm wondering pedagogically if that's a useful way to spend these funds, meaning tablets for kids and screens for kids as the primary learning aid. Meaning the iMacs, the desktops, that sort of thing seems like for a very different purpose. And I'm wondering about the total fee of this for this type of learning equipment.
So this is a replacement of equipment. It was replacing equipment that was already existed and aged out. So for this year, it was the iPads for grades 1, and then next year is the iPads for grades K. It's to replace existing equipment that's already in there. So it's not in addition. All of this is replacement of aging equipment.
Sure, sure. So I guess my question is probably misplaced because it's not so much about the how we're financing this, but more like structurally, do we need a Chromebook for first and second graders, really? Because I guess that's not an equipment question necessarily.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, sure.
So the devices are specifically developmentally appropriate based on the software that we use that are embedded in the curriculum. So for example, kindergartners, because of the touch screen and to be able to drag and drop, depending if they're using math manipulatives or even if they're completing an assessment, the software functions differently on different devices. So we work with Dan and his department and the infrastructure behind the scenes around some of the software to understand which tools would be best suited for the software that we use. We need to be very clear that as we transition and pivot out of COVID, we are using the devices in the classroom less and less. We use it intentionally for small group instruction, or if there's an opportunity for students to use them at home, or transfer some of the software to use at home. It's consistent when they come into the classroom. So we are no longer using the devices as we did during COVID. However, there is a purpose and an intention to use them at certain points throughout the school day in certain content areas, in certain points of the instructional block, whether it be reading, literacy, or math.
And if I can just piggyback on that, this is one-to-one during the school day, correct?
That's correct.
Because quite frankly, we learned over the years that they have to be readily available so that when the teacher needs them, they're there ready for the students. You know, years ago, we used to have carts, the bane of my existence, when, you know, you had a card, and now I'm talking in the older, but it was like that at Hurlbut. Laura's shaking her head. And who has the cart? Who's going to use the cart now? How do you get the cart around? Like, it was just a nightmare, and it was not effective. And so because technology, I think, is so embedded in a seamless way, it's important to have them readily available, correct? There's a cart, but it's a classroom cart. It's right there.
It's for that specific class.
Exactly.
In prior years, it could have been shared carts between 4 classrooms or between students, but personalized learning is the name of the game, and so you can't have 4 students sharing one Chromebook for a learning experience for a small group. Each student needs their own individual device. Because of the products that we use, it tracks the students individually and helps provide the content that's tailored to them. So that's why we need, you know, a one-to-one during the day. What's the difference between one-to-one during the day and one-to-one, let's say, at the middle school? They don't take them home. That's why when we say one-to-one during the day, they stay at the school at the end of the day.
One thing, though, I don't want people listening to think is these little children are not in front of, whether it be a Chromebook or an iPad, for the 7 hours that they're there. It is used in a very planful way. Mrs. Kadis, can you speak to that, please?
Yes, and I can reiterate a lot of what Tina had said. We use them for very specific purposes at very specific times during the day. So there are blocks of instructional times when they don't use them at all. But depending on where the student is in their learning and what the purpose is, they may be on and off of them during certain content areas for certain times. Part of what we do in the libraries, they work with our librarian on tech skills. We do coding. We use the iPads for that. So that's an example when they might be on it for a defined period of time.
Follow-up question. So is this roughly equivalent of what we had in terms of these learning tools pre-pandemic, meaning 2019, were tablets used in this similar way? So you're saying replacements, was there roughly that same number back then, or is this an outgrowth of the reliance on technology the last 2 years?
So the district, in the beginning of the pandemic, really had to pivot in order to provide devices. So Hurlbut had less devices, but the district had more. So they were reappropriated down to the Hurlbut level during the pandemic, and it's where it stayed to a one-to-one program, whereas prior it was a little mix and match, where there were iPads, but maybe not enough for an entire grade, or Chromebooks, not enough for all of second grade, for instance. So we shimmied equipment around that was available in the other buildings down to Hurlbut, and we kind of threw together I don't want to say throw together a negative term, but we put together a one-to-one program, K to 8, very fast. But we did that using the existing equipment, and that equipment was already getting old. So in terms of overall equipment, it wasn't an addition, but the amount of devices at Hurlbut, yes, we did increase that, and we have stayed at the current number of 1 device per student.
Yeah, can I ask, are you asking whether or not they were utilizing the technology in the curriculum prior to the pandemic? Is that what you're asking?
Just literally a line item ratio, meaning there's, on this, it looks like there's 1 device for every single student. And I'm just wondering if before we went through the whole remote learning experience, if we were using 1 device per student before as well,
We were at the intermediate school and the middle school.
but not at Hurlbut.
Not at Hurlbut, no, it was like 2/3, 1 to 2/3. You know, there was some shared devices at Hurlbut.
I see. The question's not inspired by being against the investment in the learning. My question is simply like, is it the most effective way to foster that learning, given the amount that it would cost as compared to other kind of interventions? Having a second grader who actually went through some of this, my experience of watching her use Lexia or the different sort of platforms, like I have a degree of skepticism about the actual efficacy of the tablet experience, which is why I'm asking about if that is actually maps to effective learning outcomes from a tool standpoint, which is why I was asking about that. But maybe it's a misguided question based on facilities. I'm curious about the actual program itself.
I have a second grader too, so I understand
Yeah.
that perception. I think what we're trying to also reinstate is that balance around the use of technology and integration and preparing students for 21st century and knowing that they are in a world where that is the world that they live in, right? So we need to be able to prepare them to be device agnostic so they can transition from any tools that they're using and use it with purpose and intent, and being able to really enhance the curriculum and not use it as a unproductive tool that isn't actually providing learning outcomes, to your point. So we are pivoting back and balancing some of and reviewing the software that we currently have. I mean, I lived this too, where during COVID, everything was free. Everything under the sun was free, and we were trying to vet the resources that were most high quality and really providing the outcomes that you're discussing. So this year, moving into next year, we're reevaluating all of the software in the entire district on which one's giving us the most return on our investment, and also looking at high-quality usage as well as how it aligns to the curriculum. And we don't need tools that are redundant, and we don't need tools that are outlined because kids just have fun using it versus what are the educational outcomes and the return on achievement that were really the whole purpose of having them. So we're reevaluating all of them throughout the district since I arrived. Dan and I are actually vetting them all and looking at usage, looking at quality, and looking at redundancy, as well as being able to really identify the ones that are truly aligned to the curriculum and the standards at each level.
But the operative word here in this conversation tonight is replacement,
Yes.
right? So we're replacing
We're
technol-
replacing, you know, smart
technology-
boards, we're
technology
replacing.
that we're currently using
Correct.
that have reached their useful life.
Correct, these are not brand new equipment, they're replaced.
Yeah.
Yep.
You brought up the digital being device agnostic, which I love that idea. My challenge is always getting devices out of my kids' hands, not having them be better at switching with them. But do we have, out of curiosity, is there a focus on like digital hygiene or digital literacy, so that as people are growing up, that they're being more aware of the potential downsides of screen learning?
Yeah, we have a whole curriculum, digital citizenship, and what it means to leave a digital footprint, very much from the young age all the way up to adulthood.
Yep.
And our library media specialists have an emphasis around that, and also educating our teachers too, to identify areas in which they need to be very mindful of access to certain software, especially now that the state requires platforms to, what's the word I'm looking for? They have to sign off on student privacy and student usage agreements. You
Yep.
can't just say, I'm going to just use whatever I want. So there's a lot of security around software and the use of that software for students to access.
For a while, the student software was the wild, wild west, and then the pandemic made it even worse because of their marketing ploys of making it free for the year. But the year prior to that, the Connecticut put out what Tina alluded to, the Act on Student Privacy, CT PA 16-189, which basically made all of us enter into contractual agreement with every single piece of software we have in order to protect student privacy. But the media specialists also, for instance, starting in third grade, at the beginning of the year, before the students get their Chromebooks, they have to meet with the media specialist to go over digital citizenship at the beginning phase. And then it's done throughout the year, but to understand digital footprint, what negative consequences that mean. You can't use every website as research for papers. So understanding all of that, and we're aligning that with like ISTE standards, which is international standards for technology and education, to make sure that we're following that guidelines. And they actually do want you to start at a young age. However, we're walking that tightrope between screen time and not too much screen time. And that was actually something that came out from everybody post-pandemic, was like, get them off the screens as much as you can, especially the younger students. So they're leaving the screens, but they still need them. They still have a very, very important function in education.
Yeah, that's sort of the source of my question, which is it necessary? But I understand that this is more of an issue of replacing existing, so that satisfies what I was asking about.
Maybe as a board, we can schedule a session on
Yeah.
technology in the classroom.
100%.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions?
I have a quick finance question on financing this. Two things. This is, we own it at the end of 4 years, right?
Yeah, it's capital lease. Yeah, with a $1 buyout at the end of the lease.
Okay. And I kind of remember sitting here, I don't know if it was this time last year, but I think last year was the first year we talked about sort of this phased-in leasing.
Yep.
Just for clarification, I'm just trying to figure out the number, the 298,000 is for what we want to purchase in the next fiscal year, and this fiscal year?
Yep.
Okay. And then we sort of have this rolling plan for the next 5 years. So we're going to basically have this conversation every year.
I was about to mention that. I think as we approve this, we have to keep in mind that this is a replacement cycle. And the intent of this lease plan is to build into the budget funding for technology equipment. Because as Dan alluded to, when we were in COVID, we struggled, right?
Yeah.
We have outdated equipment. So we have, as the board, has to have the discipline to continue to fund this for the next 4 years, because in order for it to be effective and to work the way we intended, it has to be funded for 4 years.
Okay, so that brings up my next question. But first, where does the 298,000 come from? 'Cause I'm trying to square it up.
Right.
So it's less, yeah.
That's fine. So the plan was 315, and I think I mentioned that we had some favorable pricing, which caused the total price to be a little bit less than the 315.
Okay.
Right. So you got to remember, so we start our budget now, right? So all the planning happens now, right? And what actually happens in reality can be a little bit different. It could be a plus or a minus. So the 315, that's what we kind of gave what we planned. And the reality is that is what we currently have. So that's the difference between the 296 and the 315.
Okay, and in our annual budget, there's money for technology. It sounds like by leasing, you're sort of, we're just shifting it from a big purchase in a particular budget to spreading it out over 4 or 5 years, right? Or in this case, 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So have we looked at, though, if right now we're paying for the lease that we started last year?
We did not. We actually purchased last year.
This is so confusing.
I know. So if you go back in fiscal 22,
Yeah.
right, when Dan presented it, it was done in fiscal 22, we were going to start it. So fiscal 22, we had an opportunity because we had favorable finance, we had favorable operating surplus. So we decided in fiscal 22 to just outright purchase those equipment. This year, we decided, you know what, let's not do that. Even if we had favorability within our operating budget, let's stick to the plan that we have and let's just lease the equipment. So this, technically, you can consider fiscal 23, the current fiscal year, to be year one.
Okay, So that, then, just to finish out my thought, so because we're gonna have potentially these concurrent leases, for example, next year, if we just went with the rough plan, cost may slide up or down either which way. When I look at things like finance charge, $22,000 finance charge, that sounds great by itself. But next year, we're gonna have this year's $22,000 finance charge and next year's 22,000 or maybe more.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, the 22,000 represent the total finance charge for the full
Oh,
lease term.
correct, okay, sorry. All right.
Are there more questions? I move that the Weston Board of Education approve the technology bid as presented. Is there a second?
I second.
Jody, can you call it? Aye.
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 Great. Lisa, educational? Oh, you have one more? I'm sorry.
So just by way of an update in terms of operations. So we did receive notice from the Aspetuck Health Department that there was a complaint by a member of the community regarding 2 specific rooms at Hurlbut. So I kind of just wanted to talk in general about that. So before I even go on, I just want to say that we have a dedicated group of staff, right? Everyone in the facilities department, they're dedicated to Weston and to all of our equipment. And we're actually very fortunate to have those guys here. So Mark Cooper, the director at the health department, informed us of the complaint. I met with Mark Cooper, I want to say maybe a week or so ago. I just want to kind of give an idea as to what his findings were. So the health department concluded that the rooms 21 and 22 in the North House at Hurlbut did not present any mold issues and confirmed the following. The health department has no recommendation for Hurlbut at this time. No mold or adverse moisture conditions were observed in those 2 classrooms or hallways leading to that room. In addition, the inside conditions of room 20 and 21 are well maintained with no sign of staining or sagging ceiling tiles. The inspection revealed no moisture intrusion or mold growth in the classrooms or hallway. All relative humidity levels observed by the health department are considered low, dry, and not conducive to mold growth. In addition to that, there have been no previous mold or air quality complaints at Hurlbut by the teachers, parents, or students. And I do want to point out that we do make a routine inspection of all our facilities just for any signs of mold or any kind of indoor air quality concern. In addition to that, we do have a robust system where if any staff member, if they have any complaints, that they do enter that concern into our school dude. And whenever we do have any concern, regardless whether it's of air quality or not, those concerns are addressed by the facilities department.
Can I ask a question, Phil? I think the member of the public who had actually, during public comment, said something, she specifically referenced a previous mold study that we'd had done in that area. Can you address that?
Sure. So we did 2 inspections. We did an inspection in August of 21, and that report came back that we were, quote unquote, there were occasional occurrence of mold. Similar, the report the inspection that was done in August of 22 had similar findings. So we really have no concern at this time about mold at Hurlbut.
Was there any sort of remediation that was necessary?
There was no remediation that was necessary in 21 or in 22. And I just want to mention that internal air quality has been a concern during COVID. If the board will recall that we did purchase and we tried to equip all rooms with a portable air conditioner, a HEPA filter, and where applicable, dehumidifiers as well. So we are prompt and we're very reactive, are proactive in our concern regarding the facilities and any concern regarding indoor air quality.
Thanks, Phil.
Other comments or questions? Great, now we can move on.
The Educational Optimization Committee. I am pleased to report that we have organized an Educational Optimization Committee, that's a mouthful, that will consist of district staff, administration. I'm very pleased to say that Peter Gordon is going to chair the committee as the Board of Ed rep, and Steve Ezes will also be involved in the committee, and we have some parent representatives as well. So what is the purpose of this committee? I think that the most important thing is what Steve said earlier. It is to come up with a recommendation for the town. We all are aware that there was the Facilities Optimization Committee, and there was some recommendations last spring moving forward, and then it was brought back to the, given back to the schools as well as the Board of Ed. So really, the purpose of this committee is to study the proposals that the recommendations that the facilities, the Town Facilities Optimization Committee put forward in the spring, to analyze our programming, our enrollments, and really to give our recommendations on how to optimize our resources as a district. You know, our vision for the Weston Public Schools, you know, we have a vision and a mission, but the vision is that we will be the standard of excellence in our educational programming. And so that is the goal also of the work of this committee, to look at it through the educational lens and then determine recommendations that will then be taken to the town. We have the selectmen, we have the Board of Finance, and what will come out of all of this is it will become a town decision on what the town deems appropriate by its citizens. But we are going very carefully through this work. One of the first steps is to have an organizational meeting. The representatives from the committee are being given the links to the, if they haven't seen, although the principals have, I believe, seen the meeting, the video of the meeting where it was presented to the town, as well as the PowerPoint, the work that Tectron did, and then to also look very carefully at the December 5th enrollment projections. That's kind of all the background, and then move forward after the new year to kind of get into more of the nitty-gritty, again, looking at it through the lens of our resources as a district, and how will we make sure that we see our vision realized.
Questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
What parents, how was it determined, how many parents, what parents?
We didn't want the group to be too large. I believe there are 14 total. We have 2 parents that are elementary, middle parents. And that was selected in conjunction with talking to the principals. I reached out to several parents. I think that the thought also is while it's a district view, especially when you look at the recommendations of the FOC, a lot of it has to deal with the K-8 program. And so we wanted to make sure that we had representative from each. That doesn't mean that those representatives are, I would say they are also liaisons, and that we'll be looking to get feedback from the larger parent community.
So is WIS, you said there's 2 Hurlbut, 2 middle school, are there?
No, there's 2 parents total.
2 parents total?
2 parents total, yes. Because with the 2 parents, the 2 Board of Ed members, the principals, my group here to the left, Tina, Phil, Tracy, and Dan DeVito, we're already up to 14. The goal, though, is going to be, or the charge is to also get feedback, and we're going to talk about how to get feedback from the wider parent community, as well as also the staff and the teachers that are, doing the work in the classrooms.
Are these meetings going to be open to the public? Or are they going to be,
It's going to be set up as we normally do.
Yeah, it's totally, it's
It's
totally open
open.
it's totally open to the public.
Perfect.
Open, videotaped, all of that.
perfect, okay?
And just from a timing point of view, the reason I made the comment earlier is there's a window of when you apply for state grants, and that's by June of each calendar year. So if you don't make the June window for 2023, you're now being pushed into June of 2024. Now, the plans don't have to be all tied up in a nice bow, but you have to have you have to have made sufficient progress that you can give the state an idea of what you think you're going to spend. And so my guess is meeting the June 2023 window is going to be very tight, if not, unlikely. And frankly, there's no reason to rush it because, at least from my viewpoint, we're making a decision that's generational. And, there are people in this room that will not be paying whatever the ultimate cost is. There's people who, 20 years from now. And the Board of Finance has started they're well along the way in what they think the town's balance sheet should look like as we try to determine not only the configuration of the buildings, but the cost of technology and everything else that's going to go in them.
Yeah, there's a great deal to consider here, and I think we have to proceed very planfully and look at it from this is really getting into the weeds and looking at it. Just with the enrollment, and you look at the enrollment and the projections, and we're going to be looking in December. One of the things that, Melissa, you pushed me on, and I think it's important, is we look at, if families are still living in town, but their children are no longer going to the public schools, how was that decision reached? And I actually have some upcoming calls that my assistant Jody scheduled with, that obviously we're not going to, share their names, but to also get some anecdotal data, because we want to provide the best program that we can in this town. And I think that's important as well. If we have people that are leaving, going to private school, boarding school, if they're moving away for work, we get that. But is there something that we need to consider?
Yeah, look, we're coming out of some pretty odd times, to say the least. And I'm not sure you can say this is a trend. We don't know.
Yeah, we don't.
Don't know.
I think the more data that we can look at from different angles, triangulate everything, and also get feedback from different stakeholders that really understand the educational program and that are going to be here as we move forward. I remember I was here when we went through, Patty was too, when we went through the first building, when there were portables all over the place at the middle school, and fourth grade was over there, and the transition to the new school, and so there's a lot involved.
Yeah, and look, I'm just kind of speaking out of turn. Looking at the projections, trying to make a 10 or 20-year projection of what the population of Weston or any place else is going to look like, good luck. I don't think there's any demographers that have come up with what's transpired over the last 3 years. Where does that fit into? And I'll leave it to Peter to look at the numbers and tell us if they're deviating beyond the norm. But
I think you need more parent representation, and maybe
we can certainly consider that.
Yeah, maybe just change it a bit where you bring in the educators for areas where their specialty would be utilized. But we're talking about a 20-year plan. Why do people move to Weston? What do they like about the schools? The teachers, educators are great, but we got to find out before, because people move into town before they meet the educators.
Well, I also see it as part, David, I understand what you're saying, and we could certainly expand the group to include a couple of more parents. I think it's how the parents on the committee help us with the task of getting the wider feedback of the parent community. I think it's important that they have a voice, whether it be through a survey or, and I don't think it has to be one thing, to how to really understand, the pulse of the community, and like you said, what do they hope for their children, why they're here, and how they feel about all of this. It's very, very important at a large scale to understand that.
Additionally, Lisa, the Educational Optimization Committee will be making periodic reports here at our meetings, updates. Correct.
Yeah. But we can certainly,
Yeah, David, let's just talk about that.
we can certainly include two more, but also then what is the task that they can help us with? That's what's important.
It's also a big time commitment.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
when you
so we
move,
have to find people who are,
raising a family is a big time commitment, so
Yeah.
I just think it's important to find out what motivates people to move here.
Yeah.
And what motivates people to keep their kids in the schools, and you're gonna look into what motivates them to take their kids out of the schools, so we're kind of.
We have to, we have to provide multiple opportunities, whether it be focus groups, coffees, a survey, reaching out to people, asking for feedback. All of that is important to get a clear picture.
Just wanted to say too, as we think about building out in the next 10 and 20 years, the curriculum of what we teach and the buildings being able to facilitate that is so important. So the fact that we have accreditation going on this year and we're looking at digital, the literacy programs of the younger grades, there's so much review of curriculum already that I think is going to lend itself really well to going forward with our planning.
Well said. I think that's critical. We are having our NEASC evaluation at the high school, which is important. It's not just important for the high school, but it speaks to the vertical articulation of the lower schools. And then we have Tri-State that there's a meeting tomorrow, I believe, correct? Ms. Henkel, that we're looking at Tri-State. They're doing a math review for us. We're bringing in a consultant that we worked with last year. He's coming back, John Antonetti, again, to look at instruction in the classroom. And I think that the presentations and when Tektron presented, they did a really great job, and this is reminding me, we have to include that video, of talking about schools for the future and how, we don't know what we don't know, but we do know things about space and flexibility and light and all of that I think is important.
Melissa, you want to?
Sure, we're moving on to the policies?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. So just for Chad's benefit, we have a two-step process for enacting policies here. So the three that we're discussing today are up for the first read, and that means that I'll let you know what the policy committee has discussed and what the policies are, and then they'll be presented again at our next board meeting for a vote. So you have the opportunity to reflect on this and come back to me if you have comments or thoughts, or if you've done that in advance with the agenda and the packet, then we can discuss it now. So the first policy is in the Series 2000, it's the uniform treatment of recruiters. Now, this is a mandatory policy from the state, so we didn't really have any discretion with this. We didn't have a policy like this before. It basically just gives equal access to student information to recruiters. There is a provision in there that parental permission is required for military recruiters, and that's a notice that goes out to parents annually. So I'll answer any questions if anyone has any about this policy. No? Okay. The second one is in the Series 4000, and that's the Emergency Action Plan for Interscholastic and Intramural Athletic Events. So this is basically an emergency action plan, and it is also a mandatory new policy required by the state. We were actually already doing this, and we had an emergency action plan in place that dovetails very well with this policy. So it just requires things like knowing the location of where all of our practices are, who's there, what kind of equipment we have, what our procedures are for various different types of injuries, so that everyone knows what to do in the case of an emergency. Also, we pass our emergency action plan on to the intramural sports and anybody that uses our Weston facilities that isn't the school athletics, and they also would follow the emergency action plan. So that's very helpful as well. And we've been doing that well before this policy was mandated by the state. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, terrific. The third and final policy tonight is also in the Series 4000, and it's the exertional heat illness awareness for intramural and interscholastic athletes. So this is basically a policy that was also mandated by the state and requires coaches to be aware of a heat-related illness at sports practices. There's requirements for coaches, and then there's information that is also required to be delivered to students and their families. Obviously, it's an important issue here. We were already doing this as well, I mean, obviously taking care of our athletes with heat-related illnesses. I'm happy to answer any questions on this policy. Okay, all right, well, if you have any thoughts, anybody, even in the public, send them to me, and we can incorporate them before we bring it up for second read and vote next month. That's all I have, Steve.
Great, thank you. The next are the committee reports and the minutes from the most recent, from the previous meetings. David, is there anything in communications that you should talk about?
We're getting a new website. And I'll also say that if you watch any of the communication videos, we always start out smiling. I don't know about the other committees, but ours always starts out smiling.
You can't Photoshop smiles on people's faces, you know?
No need with communications committee.
June's just got really good timing when to hit the start button.
Oh, okay. Do we need a motion on each set of minutes, or just in total? On the,
We typically approve the minutes in the committee meetings.
okay, great. The second is mine. It's the Financial Facilities and Operations Committee. There's really nothing to report. Our most recent meeting, we spent a good amount of time going through exactly what we talked about this evening. And the Policy Committee?
Exactly what I just presented for the first reads. We did skip curriculum. I don't know if Bernie.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. If you had anything, Bernie?
Our big highlights from curriculum were a part of this meeting as well.
Okay. And I think that's it.
Yes, just that we have the special meeting coming up on December 5th at 7 o'clock, and that's going to be live in person and live streamed. And then we have our regular board meeting on December 19th at 6, and that's going to be remote via webinar and will be live streamed. And then I just think, if you're ready, we need a motion to adjourn.
Just one more question, Phil. In terms of the budget and preparing budget discussions, are we?
Right, I think at the last meeting, we did review the calendar.
Yeah.
So we're pretty much on target.
Great.
I think we'll start our discussions in January. So right now, we're in the preliminary stages of discussion internally to get the board that budget in early January and our wonderful meetings in January.
There you go. Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Happily. I move that we adjourn.
Is there a happy second?
I'll second.
Jody? Aye.
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 Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving.